It was just another ordinary evening, or so I thought. The kids were in bed, and Karen, my wife of 10 years, was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. I was in the kitchen, washing up after dinner, when I noticed she was unusually quiet. Normally, she'd be chatting about her day, but tonight, her face was glued to the screen, her expression guarded. "Anything interesting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She flinched, almost dropping the phone, then laughed nervously. "Oh, just work stuff," she said quickly, locking the screen and setting the phone face down on the coffee table. It was a small thing, but something about her reaction sent a chill down my spine. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw her phone light up on the nightstand. A message popped up from someone named Chris. The preview read, "Can't stop thinking about tonight. When can we meet again?" My heart sank. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Who was Chris? What did he mean by tonight? I told myself it could be a misunderstanding, maybe an old friend from work or a prank text. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Karen walked into the bedroom and caught me looking at the phone. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw panic on her face before she quickly replaced it with a forced smile. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "Who's Chris?" I asked, holding her gaze. Her face froze, and she let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, Chris. He's just a coworker. We had a late meeting today, that's all. Nothing to worry about." "Then why is he texting you at midnight about meeting again?" I pressed, my voice trembling. Karen's expression shifted, defensive now. "It's not what you think. He's just, you know how some people are overly friendly. You don't have to make it into a big deal." But I wasn't buying it. Her tone, her body language, everything screamed that she was lying. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me had already cracked. That night, as she lay asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. My mind replayed the moment over and over. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a friendly text. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. The unease lingered for days after that night. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the small changes in Karen's behavior were impossible to ignore. She was on her phone constantly, retreating into the other room for vague work calls, and growing impatient whenever I asked even the simplest questions. Her once familiar presence now felt distant, like a stranger living under the same roof. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. The doubt was eating me alive. While Karen was in the shower, I picked up her phone. I knew it was wrong, but I needed answers. My hands shook as I entered her passcode, a combination I'd seen her use countless times. What I found made my stomach drop. Messages with Chris filled the screen, each one more damning than the last. They weren't just friendly texts, they were intimate, filled with words that shattered the trust one thought we had. There were details about secret meetings, hotel rooms, and moments they'd shared. Moments that should have belonged to us. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt heavy, and my hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She had told him things she used to tell me, shared parts of herself that I thought were ours alone. She had even complained about me, painting a picture of a marriage that was cold and lifeless, a version of our life I didn't recognize. The worst part was a photo. It was taken in what looked like a hotel room, Karen smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. That smile used to be for me. Now it was for someone else. When Karen came out of the bathroom, she must have noticed the look on my face because she froze. She didn't ask what was wrong, she knew. In that moment, her silence confirmed everything. She didn't deny it, didn't even try to offer an excuse. Instead, she just stood there, staring at me like a child caught in a lie. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was walk out of the room. My mind was racing, my emotions a storm I couldn't control. How long had this been going on? How could she look me in the eyes every day and pretend everything was fine? That night, I slept in the guest room. Or rather, I tried to. Sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying everything I'd read, every moment in our marriage that now felt like a lie. Had there been signs I missed? Was it my fault? The questions were relentless, and no matter how much I wanted them to stop, they wouldn't. By morning, I had made up my mind to confront her properly. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her attempts to deflect the blame. I wanted the truth. All of it. She owed me that much. When I pressed her, she admitted it. At first, she tried to downplay it, saying it was a mistake, something that just happened. But the more I pushed, the more the truth unraveled. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, repeated, deliberate, and calculated. She had been seeing him for months, lying to me and our children to keep the facade intact. Her explanations felt hollow, like she was reading from a script. She blamed stress, loneliness, and even me, claiming I had been too focused on work or too distant emotionally. It was as if she was trying to rewrite our history to justify what she had done. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about me. It was about her choices, her selfishness, and her willingness to destroy our family for the sake of a fling. I felt numb as she spoke, her words washing over me like static. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she seemed more concerned with saving face than acknowledging the damage she had caused. By the time she finished, I didn't have the energy to respond. I walked away, leaving her in the kitchen as I tried to process everything. I knew I would never see her the same way again. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had chosen to destroy our life together without a second thought. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. Each one felt like a cruel reminder of what we had lost. Our wedding day, the kids' birthdays, family vacations. Moments that once brought me joy now felt like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain was too deep, too raw, to escape as tears. Instead, it sat in my chest like a weight, pressing down on me with every breath. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: our marriage would never be the same. The days that followed were a blur. Every corner of the house felt like a reminder of Karen's betrayal. The dining table where we had family dinners, the couch where we had spent lazy weekends, even our bedroom, it all felt tainted. I couldn't escape the suffocating weight of what I'd uncovered. But just as I thought I was beginning to process everything, the betrayal cut deeper. It was worse than I had imagined. I decided to look further, to dig into the parts of Karen's life I had once trusted completely. Her phone gave me access to emails, messages, and hidden details about her secret life. What I found left me reeling. The affair wasn't just with a stranger or a coworker. It was with someone close to me, someone I never would have suspected. It was with my friend, Brian. Brian had been in my life for years. We had shared countless beers, celebrated milestones together, and supported each other through hard times. He had been at my kids' birthday parties, laughing and joking like family. And all the while, he had been sneaking behind my back with Karen. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. How could they do this? How could two people I trusted so deeply betray me like this? I felt humiliated, like a fool who had been oblivious to the obvious. I found more messages, ones that revealed just how far their relationship had gone. They had been meeting up regularly, at hotels, during supposed work trips, even at places Brian and I used to go together. They mocked me in their texts, laughing at how easy it had been to keep me in the dark. Karen had shared things about our marriage with him, things I thought were private. She had turned my vulnerability into a joke for their amusement. I couldn't stop picturing them together, Brian laughing at me while he betrayed our friendship, Karen smiling as if she hadn't just burned our family to the ground. It made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt. It was the calculated way they had both worked to deceive me. Karen had lied to my face, made excuses to leave the house, and pretended everything was fine. Brian had sat across from me at dinner, listened to me talk about my struggles, and pretended to care while he was stabbing me in the back. The anger I felt was almost unbearable. It burned in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to confront them both, to scream and demand answers, but what would it change? Nothing could undo the damage they had done. Karen's attitude didn't help. She was defensive and dismissive, acting like I was overreacting. She insisted it wasn't serious, as if that made it better. Her excuses were empty, and her apologies felt rehearsed. There was no real remorse, just an attempt to salvage her image and control the fallout. Meanwhile, Brian had the audacity to text me, pretending nothing was wrong. He asked if I wanted to meet up for drinks, as if we were still friends. I couldn't bring myself to respond. The thought of seeing him, of sitting across from him and pretending I didn't know, made my blood boil. I began to see Karen's behavior in a new light. Every lie she had told, every time she had been working late or visiting a friend, now felt like part of an elaborate charade. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was cruel. She had no problem lying to me, betraying me, and putting our family at risk, all while playing the role of a loving wife and mother. The kids started to notice the tension. I tried to shield them from it, but it wasn't easy. They asked why Mommy and Daddy weren't eating dinner together anymore or why I had been so quiet. I told them I wasn't feeling well, but I could see the worry in their eyes. At night, when the house was quiet, I found myself replaying the past few years in my mind. I wondered how long this had been going on, how many moments I had been blind to. I questioned every smile, every kiss, every time Karen had said she loved me. Had any of it been real? Or had she been lying to me from the start? I wanted to hate her, to cut her out of my life completely, but it wasn't that simple. We had a family, a life built together. No matter how much I wanted to walk away, I couldn't ignore the fact that we were tied together by our kids, by years of shared history. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in this marriage. Not anymore. The betrayal had cut too deep, and there was no coming back from it. In the days that followed, I felt like I was living in a haze. The betrayal consumed me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Even the smallest tasks felt like monumental efforts. I went through the motions, getting the kids ready for school, going to work, making dinner, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time I looked at Karen, I saw the lies, the manipulation, and the selfishness that had destroyed everything we had built together. She tried to act as if things were normal, but her efforts were half-hearted at best. She started cleaning more, cooking meals she hadn't bothered with in years, and making small talk as if none of this had happened. It was insulting. Her attempts to play the part of the perfect wife felt like another betrayal. Did she think a few chores and polite words would erase the damage? One evening, she asked if we could sit down and talk. I didn't want to, but I knew it was inevitable. I sat across from her at the dining table, staring at the woman I once loved, and listened as she tried to explain herself again. She talked about how she'd been feeling neglected and unappreciated, how she had made a mistake because she was lonely. Her words were calculated, her tone carefully measured, as though she'd rehearsed it all in front of a mirror. But her excuses fell flat. I knew the truth now. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a choice she had made over and over again. What infuriated me the most was how little remorse she showed. There was no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, no genuine apology. Instead, she seemed more concerned with justifying her actions, as if explaining her side would somehow make it all okay. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told her that I had seen the messages with Brian, that I knew how far it had gone and how long it had been happening. Her face went pale, and for the first time, she looked truly cornered. She stammered, trying to come up with more excuses, but I cut her off. I told her I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't sit there anymore. I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside me. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, my mind racing. I thought about the years I had spent building a life with Karen, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams we had shared. It all felt like a cruel joke now. She had taken everything we had and thrown it away for her own selfish desires. The breaking point came when I thought about the kids. They didn't deserve this. They deserved a home filled with love and stability, not a battlefield where their parents barely spoke to each other. I couldn't let them grow up in an environment like this. When I returned home, Karen was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I went straight to the guest room and shut the door behind me. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, I made my decision. This marriage was over. There was no salvaging it, no fixing what had been broken. Karen had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. I started researching divorce the next morning. Quietly, without saying a word to Karen, I looked up lawyers and began to plan my exit. It wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about protecting the kids. I knew this would be messy, but I was determined to make it as painless as possible for them. Karen, meanwhile, continued her charade. She tried to play the role of the devoted wife, but her efforts only reminded me of how far we had fallen. The love I once felt for her was gone, replaced by a hollow ache and a simmering anger that I couldn't shake. The hardest part was keeping it together for the kids. They were too young to understand what was happening, but they could sense the tension. I tried to shield them from it, to keep their lives as normal as possible, but it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at them, I felt a pang of guilt. I had promised to give them a happy, stable family, and now that promise was slipping through my fingers. But I knew this was the only way forward. Staying in the marriage would only prolong the pain. It was better to end it now, to rip off the bandage and start fresh. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I made a silent vow. I would do whatever it took to protect them, to give them the life they deserved. Karen's betrayal had shattered our family, but I wouldn't let it define us. I would pick up the pieces and build something new, something better. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Once I had made the decision to divorce Karen, the clarity that came with it was almost a relief. The pain was still there, sharp and constant, but at least now I had a plan. No more waiting for her to come clean, no more hoping she'd change. It was time to take control of my life and protect what mattered most: my kids and my own sanity. The first step was finding a lawyer. I kept it quiet, making calls during my lunch break and after Karen went to bed. Each consultation was like peeling back a layer of reality I wasn't prepared for. Legal jargon, custody arrangements, asset division. It was overwhelming, but I forced myself to focus. The lawyers I spoke with were blunt but compassionate, reminding me that while the process would be messy, it was necessary. Karen seemed to sense that something was shifting. She watched me more closely, as if trying to read my mind. Her attempts to engage me grew more frequent, but they felt forced. She started asking me how I was feeling, offering to do things she hadn't done in years, like organizing a family outing or cooking my favorite meal. It was too little, too late. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table reviewing some documents a lawyer had sent me, she approached me cautiously. She asked if we could try counseling, if there was any way to fix what had happened. Her words sounded desperate, but her tone lacked sincerity. I knew she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was just afraid of losing the comfortable life we'd built together. I told her no. Counseling couldn't erase the lies or undo the betrayal. I was done giving her chances. The look on her face was a mix of shock and anger, as if she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. She accused me of giving up, of not trying hard enough to save our family. It was infuriating. After everything she had done, she had the audacity to blame me for the collapse of our marriage. But I didn't rise to the bait. I stayed calm and told her the truth. There was no saving this. The damage was too great, and I couldn't spend the rest of my life pretending everything was fine. The argument ended with her storming off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed at the table, staring at the divorce papers and wondering how we had ended up here. A part of me still felt like a failure, like I hadn't done enough to hold our family together. But deep down, I knew I had tried. I had given her second chances, and she had thrown them away. The next few days were tense. Karen swung between anger and desperation, sometimes begging me to reconsider, other times lashing out and accusing me of being cold and unforgiving. It was exhausting. I avoided her as much as I could, focusing instead on the kids and preparing for what lay ahead. I started setting things in motion, opening a separate bank account, gathering financial records, and documenting everything. My lawyer had advised me to be thorough, to prepare for the possibility that Karen might not cooperate. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be taking these steps against the woman I had once thought I'd grow old with. The hardest part was thinking about how this would affect the kids. I knew they would be confused and hurt, no matter how much I tried to shield them from the worst of it. I spent hours researching how to talk to children about divorce, how to reassure them that they were still loved and safe. The thought of sitting them down and breaking the news made my stomach churn, but I knew it had to be done. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about what life would look like after the divorce. It was hard to imagine. For so long, my identity had been tied to being a husband and a father. What would it mean to just be a single dad? Would I ever trust anyone again? I also thought about Karen. Despite everything, there were moments when I still missed her, the version of her I thought I knew. I missed the woman who used to laugh with me over silly inside jokes, who held my hand during the hard times, who looked at me like I was the only person in the world. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize anymore. The next morning, I emailed my lawyer, giving him the green light to file the paperwork. It felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, but it also felt necessary. I was finally taking a step toward reclaiming my life, toward building something better for me and my kids. Karen noticed the change in me. She stopped asking for counseling or second chances and started playing the victim instead. She told me I was being cruel, that I was destroying our family for no reason. She even accused me of wanting to replace her, though I had no idea where that came from. It didn't matter. My resolve was firm. This wasn't about revenge or punishing her, it was about protecting myself and my children from further harm. Karen had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The hardest days were still ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I was ready to face it. Once the divorce papers were served, the fallout was immediate and chaotic. Karen's initial shock quickly turned into fury. She called me selfish, accused me of destroying the family, and even suggested I was doing this out of spite. Her words stung, but I refused to engage in her attempts to manipulate the narrative. I had expected this reaction. My lawyer had warned me that it would likely get worse before it got better. Karen didn't waste any time trying to rally support from friends and family. She started calling mutual acquaintances, spinning her version of events where I was the villain who had overreacted and abandoned her. According to her, she was a loving wife who had made a mistake, and I was cold-hearted for not giving her a chance to make things right. The friends who knew the full story stood by me, offering their support and assuring me that I was doing the right thing. But there were others, people who didn't know the extent of her betrayal, who began to distance themselves. It hurt to see some of those friendships fray, but I reminded myself that the truth would eventually come out. What surprised me most was how Karen weaponized the kids. She started dropping subtle comments around them, painting herself as the victim. She'd sigh dramatically in front of them, muttering things like, "Daddy doesn't want us to be a family anymore," or "If only Daddy would forgive Mommy." At first, the kids didn't understand what she was doing. They were confused and scared, sensing the tension but not fully grasping what was happening. I could see the worry in their eyes, especially in my oldest, who was old enough to notice that something was very wrong. I made it my mission to protect them from the worst of it. I sat them down one evening and explained, as gently as I could, that Mommy and Daddy wouldn't be living together anymore. I told them it wasn't their fault, that we both loved them more than anything, and that we'd always be there for them. Their reactions broke my heart. My youngest cried, asking why we couldn't all stay together. My oldest was quiet, her face a mix of confusion and sadness. I reassured them as much as I could, but there was only so much comfort I could offer when their world was being turned upside down. Meanwhile, Karen continued to push boundaries. She showed up unannounced at my lawyer's office, demanding to speak with me. She claimed she wanted to negotiate the terms of the divorce without involving attorneys, but I knew better. This wasn't about compromise, it was about control. My lawyer stood firm, insisting that all communication go through him. Karen didn't take it well. She started sending me long emotional emails, alternating between anger and pleading. One day, she'd beg me to take her back, promising to change. The next, she'd accuse me of being heartless, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. I ignored her emails, forwarding them to my lawyer as instructed. Each one felt like a fresh wound, a reminder of how far we'd fallen. But I stayed focused on the bigger picture. The kids. They were my priority, and I wouldn't let Karen use them as pawns in her attempts to regain control. The turning point came when Karen tried to involve her parents. They called me one evening, demanding to know why I was tearing the family apart. They echoed Karen's claims, insisting she was sorry and deserved another chance. I listened patiently, letting them say their piece, but I didn't budge. I calmly explained what had happened: the affair, the lies, the betrayal. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a quiet apology from her father. They hadn't known the full story. In the weeks that followed, Karen's desperation seemed to grow. She tried to undermine me at every turn, spreading rumors and making veiled threats about custody. But I stayed resolute, refusing to let her drag me down into the chaos she was creating. The most painful moments were the ones that involved the kids. One evening, my youngest came to me in tears, saying Mommy had told him that Daddy didn't want to be a family anymore. It took every ounce of restraint not to let my anger show. Instead, I hugged him tightly and reassured him that I loved him, that nothing would ever change that. I documented everything, every comment, every email, every attempt Karen made to twist the truth. My lawyer said it might be crucial later if custody became an issue. It felt strange to think of Karen as an adversary, but that's what she had become. Despite everything, there were moments of clarity that gave me hope. I started to see glimpses of a future beyond the divorce, a life where I could focus on my kids, my own happiness, and the possibility of rebuilding. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a future worth fighting for. The fallout from Karen's betrayal was messy and painful, but it also solidified something in me. I wasn't just walking away from a broken marriage. I was walking toward a better life. After months of chaos, there was finally a sense of quiet. The divorce was still in progress, but the initial storm had passed. Karen had stopped trying to manipulate me, at least overtly, and I'd begun to carve out a new routine. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The kids were my anchor through it all. I made it my mission to show them they were loved and secure, even as everything around them changed. I picked up new routines: movie nights on Fridays, pancake breakfasts on Sundays, long walks in the park whenever the weather allowed. It wasn't the same as before, but it was ours, and that made it special. I started seeing glimpses of their resilience. My oldest became more vocal, asking thoughtful questions about the divorce and showing a maturity that amazed me. My youngest clung to me more, needing extra reassurance, but I didn't mind. Their laughter, their hugs, their trust. They were the reminders I needed that I was doing the right thing, no matter how hard it felt. Meanwhile, I focused on myself, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it felt selfish, but my therapist, someone I'd started seeing after the separation, helped me understand that healing wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I started going to the gym again, rediscovering a part of myself I'd let go. I even picked up a hobby I hadn't touched since college: woodworking. There was something therapeutic about creating something tangible, something that wasn't tied to the messiness of the past. Karen's presence in my life was now reduced to co-parenting logistics. We communicated through text or email, sticking strictly to the kids' schedules and needs. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, like when she tried to push boundaries or bring up the past, but I learned to keep those interactions short and focused. One afternoon, while dropping the kids off at my place, Karen lingered at the door longer than usual. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe? Nostalgia? She started to say something but stopped herself. I could see she wanted to revisit the past, to dredge up old wounds, but I wouldn't let her. I simply nodded, thanked her for dropping the kids off, and closed the door. The past had no power over me anymore. As the months went on, something unexpected happened. I reconnected with an old friend, Lila. We had known each other years ago, back in high school, but lost touch after graduation. She reached out after hearing about my divorce, offering her support in a way that felt genuine and kind. At first, our conversations were casual, just two old friends catching up. But as we talked more, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: ease. With Lila, there was no pretense, no tension. She listened without judgment, shared her own stories of heartbreak and healing, and reminded me that life didn't have to be as complicated as it had become. We started meeting up occasionally, coffee at first, then walks in the park. It wasn't romantic, at least not at first. It was simply a connection, a reminder that there were good, honest people out there. But over time, I began to notice the way my heart felt lighter when I was around her, the way I looked forward to her texts and calls. I was cautious. The wounds from Karen's betrayal were still fresh, and I wasn't ready to leap into anything serious. But Lila didn't push. She let things unfold naturally, and for that, I was grateful. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself scrolling through photos on my phone. There were pictures of the kids, of the life I was building with them, and then one of Lila and me, taken during a hike a few weeks earlier. We were smiling, the kind of genuine smiles I hadn't seen on my own face in years. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something stir in me, not just hope, but happiness. Real, unforced happiness. The divorce was finalized a month later. When the papers arrived in the mail, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, even a touch of grief for the life I had once imagined. But mostly, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with Karen was over. I celebrated that evening with the kids. We ordered pizza, played board games, and stayed up way past their bedtime. As I tucked them in that night, my youngest hugged me tightly and whispered, "I love you, Daddy." In that moment, I knew I was going to be okay. Lila and I continued to spend time together, though I kept things slow and deliberate. It wasn't about filling a void or moving on too quickly. It was about exploring what life could look like when built on honesty and respect. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. I was stronger, more confident, and finally at peace. The betrayal, the pain, the chaos, it had all been a chapter, but it didn't define the whole story. I was moving forward, one step at a time. The day I signed the last of the divorce papers, I felt a strange mix of finality and liberation. It was over. Karen and I were no longer bound to each other as husband and wife. What remained now was co-parenting, something I was committed to handling with dignity, no matter how complicated she tried to make it. Karen's behavior after the divorce became sporadic. Some days, she was cooperative, polite even, and other days, she was bitter and argumentative, accusing me of painting her as the villain. But I didn't engage anymore. Her words didn't have the power they once did. I had learned to focus on what mattered: my kids and the future I was building for all of us. The children adjusted surprisingly well. They missed the idea of having both parents under one roof, but they started to settle into the new routine. I made sure they felt at home in both places, decorating their rooms with things they loved and maintaining the traditions we'd created together. They grew more confident, more at ease. Their laughter, once strained and uncertain, became genuine again. As for me, I continued my quiet journey toward healing. Lila became a bigger part of my life, but we kept things steady and gradual. I wasn't rushing into anything, and neither was she. We spent time together when the kids were with Karen, often just talking for hours or enjoying simple activities like hiking or cooking. There was a moment, though, when I realized Lila wasn't just someone I liked spending time with. She was someone I trusted. It happened during a small family gathering I hosted for the kids' birthdays. Lila came by to help, quietly blending into the background as she set up decorations and helped manage the chaos of kids running around. She didn't try to steal the spotlight or make the day about herself. She was just there, in the best way possible. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the kids were asleep, we sat together in the quiet house. I thanked her for helping, and she smiled, brushing it off as nothing. But it wasn't nothing to me. It was everything. I realized then that I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was starting to trust in the possibility of love again. Karen remained a shadow in my life, but a distant one. She still tried now and then to guilt me or question my decisions. But I had drawn firm boundaries, and she knew I wouldn't bend. Her manipulations no longer landed with the same force, and over time, her attempts grew less frequent. One afternoon, Karen asked to meet. She claimed she wanted to clear the air and apologize. Reluctantly, I agreed, more for my own closure than hers. We met at a cafe, and as I sat across from her, I realized how much had changed. She looked tired, worn in a way that had little to do with age. She spoke about regret, not just for the affair, but for the choices that led us to this point. She said she'd been selfish, that she hadn't appreciated what we had until it was gone. It was the closest thing to an honest apology I'd ever heard from her, but it felt hollow. I thanked her for her words, but I didn't offer forgiveness. It wasn't out of spite, it was because forgiveness didn't feel necessary anymore. I had moved on, and I didn't need her acknowledgement to validate my healing. That meeting was the last time we spoke about the past. From then on, our interactions were strictly about the kids. As the months turned into a year, I found myself thriving in ways I hadn't expected. The pain that once felt insurmountable had dulled into a distant memory. I no longer woke up with the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Instead, I woke up with purpose, with gratitude for the life I was building. Lila and I grew closer, though I was careful to keep the kids at the center of my world. She understood that, never pressuring me to move faster than I was ready for. Slowly, we began to include her in family outings, a trip to the zoo, a picnic at the park. The kids took to her naturally, and their smiles during those moments felt like proof that I was on the right path. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Lila and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The journey hadn't been easy. The betrayal, the divorce, the fallout, it had all tested me in ways I never thought I could handle. But in the end, I had found something stronger than the pain: resilience. I wasn't the same person I had been before Karen's betrayal, but that was okay. I was stronger, wiser, and more focused on what truly mattered. My kids were happy. I was building a future with someone who valued honesty and kindness, and I had finally learned to let go of the anger and hurt. As the stars began to fill the sky that evening, I realized that while one chapter of my life had ended, a new one was just beginning. And this time, I was the author of my own story.